Welcome to Miss Scarlett, the place to be feminine. Subscribe and enjoy. Bob sauntered into the dressing room, a triumphant grin plastered on his face. He'd nailed the audition, landing the lead role in the hottest new play to hit Broadway. The only catch? He'd be playing a woman. The costume designer held up a shimmering green dress, raising an eyebrow. Ready to become Hannah? Bob chuckled. As I'll ever be. He slipped into the dress, the silky fabric hugging his lean frame. The designer placed a curly blonde wig atop his head and handed him a pair of heels. There, you're a regular Marilyn Monroe, she declared, spinning him to face the mirror. Bob barely recognized himself. With the makeup, wig, and dress, he looked every inch a glamorous starlet from the golden age of Hollywood. Not bad, he murmured, striking a pose. Not bad at all. Opening night arrived in a flurry of nerves and excitement. Bob took a deep breath as he waited in the wings, the dress swishing around his stocking-clad legs. The curtain rose and he sashayed on stage, slipping into character as easily as donning a glove. The audience roared with laughter and applause as Bob delivered his lines with pitch-perfect comedic timing. By the time the curtain fell, the crowd was on their feet, cheering wildly. Bob took his bows, grinning from ear to ear. Backstage, the cast and crew celebrated their successful debut. You coming to the after-party, Bob? His co-star asked, clapping him on the shoulder. Wouldn't miss it, Bob replied. Just let me change first. But as he made his way to the dressing room, the costume designer intercepted him, a harried look on her face. Bob, thank goodness. I need you to do me a huge favor. Sure, what's up? Bob asked, perplexed. One of the producers is throwing a big fancy party tonight for some out-of-town investors. He wants the star of the show there in costume to mingle and impress them, she explained. I know it's last minute, but any chance you could throw on a fresh wig and head over? I'd owe you big time. Bob hesitated for a moment, glancing down at his dress and heels. Spending his night off still dolled up as his character wasn't exactly his idea of fun, but the hopeful look on the designer's face swayed him. He could play Hannah for a little while longer if it meant keeping the money flowing for their passion project. All right, I'm in, he agreed with a wry smile. Point me to the glitz and glamour. An hour later, Bob found himself waltzing into a swanky hotel ballroom on a fresh pair of stilettos, a newly styled wig upon his head. Lavish floral arrangements and twinkling chandeliers transformed the space into an elegant wonderland. Waiters wove through the well-dressed crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Bob grabbed a glass of bubbly and took a fortifying sip, scanning the room. He felt a tad ridiculous, all gussied up among New York City's elite while masquerading as his own fictional creation. But hey, he was an actor. He could pull off this role too. Spotting some of the other cast members, Bob headed their way. They waved excitedly as he approached. Hannah, over here! Bob froze, realizing they didn't recognize him as himself. Of course not, when he looked like his character's twin. Might as well roll with it. Hello, darlings, he trilled in his best breathy Maryland voice. Smashing party, isn't it? They giggled and nodded, complimenting his performance. As they chattered on about the show, a distinguished older gentleman sidled up to their circle. Bob recognized him as Richard Macy, one of the wealthiest theater patrons in the city. Pardon me, Richard interjected smoothly. I just had to come and meet the radiant star of tonight's show. Hannah, is it? He raised Bob's hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to the back of it. Enchanted, Bob replied coyly, feeling only mildly ridiculous. He batted his false eyelashes for good measure. Richard chuckled. I must say, your portrayal absolutely captivated me. You're an immense talent. Why, thank you, Bob gushed. "I do adore the spotlight. Listen, I'm hosting a private dinner party next week for some producer friends of mine." Richard continued, still clasping Bob's hand. "I would be most honored if you'd join us as my special guest. We'd all love to get to know the magnificent Hannah better." Bob's eyes widened. Attend a fancy dinner party as his female alter ego? While incredibly tempting to have this influential man's attention, that seemed like taking the charade a bit too far. He couldn't actually pretend to be a woman off stage, could he? Scrambling for a response, he nodded and affected a breezy laugh. "Oh, I would be delighted, but let me check my schedule and have my people call your people, He wiggled his fingers free of Richard's grasp. Of course. Richard produced a business card with a flourish. "I look forward to hearing from you, my dear." With a parting wink, he melted back into the crowd. Bob stared down at the embossed card in his hand. What had he gotten himself into? He needed to set the record straight before this case of mistaken identity snowballed out of control. But as he glanced around at all the powerful players schmoozing and celebrating his success, he wondered, would it really be so bad to be Hannah for a little while longer? She was opening doors he never could, as just Bob, the struggling actor. Maybe he could keep up the ruse for a few more days, just until he'd charmed the right people and sealed some deals. A crazy idea, sure, but fortune favored the bold, and the beautiful, apparently. Knocking back the rest of his champagne, Bob squared his padded shoulders. Hannah had a few more soirees to attend tonight. He only hoped he remembered how to use the ladies' room in this getup. Weaving his way to the bar for a refill, he nearly collided with a woman in a slinky red dress. "Oh, pardon me," he squeaked, freezing when he recognized the famous actress Veronica Veer. She ruled Broadway and had the Tonys to prove it. "No worries at all," Veronica replied, giving him a glowing smile. "I'm just thrilled to meet the dazzling new ingenue everyone's talking about. I caught your performance, and honey, you're a revelation." "That means the world coming from you," Bob demurred. "I've idolized your work for years." With a few more drinks, the night passed in a blur. A week later, Bob found himself standing in front of the full-length mirror in his cramped studio apartment, putting the finishing touches on his transformation into Hannah. He smoothed the front of his sleek black cocktail dress, adjusted the curly blonde wig, and swiped on a coat of crimson lipstick. "You sure about this, honey?" his best friend and roommate Jaden asked, from where he lounged on the futon.
"I mean, I'm all for you exploring your artistic boundaries, but this feels like you're crossing a line from method acting into straight-up deception."
Bob sighed, fiddling with the clasp of his borrowed pearl necklace.
"I know it's crazy, but I'm in too deep to back out now. Richard and all his bigwig producer friends are expecting Hannah tonight."
Jaden sat up, fixing Bob with a look. "And then what? How long can you keep playing dress-up like this? What happens when they find out the truth?" "They won't," Bob insisted, more confidently than he felt. "It's just one more night of rubbing elbows and charming the right people. Then Hannah can have a dramatically vague accident and disappear in a puff of intrigue while Bob signs some fat contracts." "If you say so," Jaden replied, shaking his head. "Just be careful, all right? This isn't a stage. It's real life with real consequences." Checking the time, Bob cursed under his breath and wobbled towards the door on 3-inch heels.
"Can't worry about that now, or I'll be late to my own party."
"Wish me luck. I'm gonna need it." "Break a leg!" Jaden called after him. "Not one of yours, though, obviously. We can't afford the hospital bill." Bob snorted as he hurried down to street level and hailed a cab, hiking up his dress to slide into the back seat. "The Kensington, please," he instructed the driver, giving the address of one of the most exclusive hotels in the city. As the cab wove through evening traffic, Bob attempted to steady his nerves, mentally rehearsing his character. He needed to fully become Hannah tonight. Her effervescent charm, her musical laugh, her airy way of captivating a room without even trying. Failure wasn't an option. The cab pulled up to the Kensington's gilded entrance, and Bob paid the driver, taking a deep breath before stepping out onto the curb. "Showtime," he murmured to himself as he sailed through the revolving doors into the opulent lobby. A few minutes later, he was seated at an intimate candlelit table draped in snowy linens, right beside a beaming Richard. Some of the other guests Bob recognized as prominent directors and theater owners, the types of people who held the strings to his dreams.
"Hannah, darling, I'm so glad you could make it,"
Richard gushed, squeezing Bob's hand.
"You look breathtaking, as always." "Well, I could hardly miss such a marvelous occasion," Bob replied warmly, channeling Hannah's lilt. "I'm thrilled to be here among such esteemed company." As waitstaff poured wine and served plates of artfully arranged appetizers, conversation flowed easily around the table. Bob found himself slipping deeper into Hannah's persona, regaling the others with witty anecdotes and batting his lashes at all the right moments. They hung on his every word, clearly captivated by the bright new star in their midst. "I have to say, my wife and I were blown away by your performance," one of the directors, Charles, mentioned between bites of seared scallop. She turned to me and said, "Now there's the next Audrey Hepburn. I think she might be right." "Oh, stop, you're making me blush," Bob demurred, secretly thrilled by the comparison. "It's true, though,"
Richard chimed in, dark eyes twinkling.
"You're a rare talent, Hannah. Broadway's never seen anything like you."
Feeling bold, Bob placed a hand on Richard's arm.
"You flatter me, darling, but I'd be nowhere without the support of angels like you."
He gazed up at the older man from beneath lowered lashes. Richard looked pleased, patting Bob's hand.
"Well, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership. We're going to do great things together, my dear."
As the night wore on and the wine flowed, Bob felt himself growing more comfortable in Hannah's skin. He flirted and teased, reveling in the way every man at the table seemed to hang on his husky laugh and coquettish looks. By the time dessert was served, he practically had them eating out of his perfectly manicured hand.
"What do you say we take this party somewhere a little more fun?"
Richard suggested as the last plates were cleared, a mischievous glint in his eye. There was a murmur of assent among the slightly tipsy producers. Bob blinked, not having planned for any additional locations, but Hannah was always game for adventure.
"Lead the way,"
he purred, accepting Richard's hand up from the table. A few minutes later, their merry band spilled out of the hotel into the crisp night air, piling into a few waiting town cars. Bob found himself tucked against Richard's side in the buttery leatherback seat, champagne bubbles fizzing through his veins as they traversed shimmering city streets. The car pulled up outside an unmarked door in a quiet, cobblestoned alley, shrouded from the main road. Bob frowned slightly as Richard ushered him out onto the misty pavement, the other men trailing behind.
"Our favorite little hideaway,"
Richard explained with a wink, rapping a pattern on the nondescript metal door. It cracked open to reveal a burly, stone-faced bouncer. Richard murmured something to him and gestured to the group. With a curt nod, the bouncer stepped aside to let them pass. Bob's senses were immediately assaulted by a wall of smoky jazz music, raucous laughter, and the clink of glasses as he stepped into the dimly lit space. Squinting through the haze, he realized they were in some sort of clandestine casino, packed with gaming tables and already intoxicated players. Richard guided him by the elbow through the throng, the producers hot on their heels. Thought we could do with some real fun," he half shouted over the din with a roguish grin. They claimed an empty high-top table next to the craps game, a waitress in a skimpy feathered costume immediately swooping in with a tray of drinks. As the men fell into boisterous conversation and started placing bets, Bob perched nervously in his seat, feeling out of his depth. Underground gambling dens were definitely not a part of Hannah's regular repertoire. He sipped the violently pink cocktail that had been placed in front of him, eyes darting between the action at the craps table and Richard's smug profile.
"I'm feeling lucky tonight, boys," Richard declared, clapping Bob on the shoulder. "I say we let our lady fair blow on the dice for good fortune, "Oh, I'm not much of a gambler," Bob demurred, even as Richard pushed a stack of chips into his hands and propelled him towards the side of the table. "Nonsense. You're our good luck charm," Richard insisted. He nodded to the tuxedoed dealer. "We're betting on our golden girl here." Pulse quickening, Bob leaned over the table as the dealer offered him the dice with a flourish. He could feel the eyes of the producers boring into his back, Richard's hand resting just above his hip. Sucking in a shaky breath, he blew gently on the dice, imagining he was backstage seconds before curtain up instead of in the middle of a seedy gambling parlor. He tossed the dice and squeezed his eyes shut, not daring to breathe. The table erupted in shouts and whoops, and Bob cracked one eye open to see the little cubes showing double sixes. A winner. "That's my girl!" Richard crowed beside him as the dealer swept a huge pile of chips their way. He grabbed Bob around the waist and planted a sloppy kiss on his cheek, sending a creep of revulsion up his spine. As the producers celebrated around him, clapping his back and ordering more drinks, Bob smiled tightly. The champagne churned in his stomach, and the walls suddenly felt too close, the air too thick. He needed space to think, to breathe something other than cigar smoke and Richard's oppressive cologne. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I need to go powder my nose," he managed, extricating himself from Richard's grip. Not waiting for a response, he wove his way through the crowd on shaky legs, scanning for any indicator of a restroom. Finally spying a small hallway near the back wall, he ducked away from the gaming floor and tried the unmarked door at the end. Mercifully, it opened into a single stall bathroom. Bob darted inside and locked the door behind him, leaning heavily against it. With trembling hands, he tugged off the wig and raked his fingers through his damp hair, sweat beading in his temples. His meticulously applied makeup had started to melt under the hot casino lights, mascara smudging beneath his eyes. Facing his reflection in the dingy mirror, he barely recognized himself. What was he doing? Bob took a few deep breaths, trying to collect himself. The surreal night swirled through his mind in a dizzying kaleidoscope. The opulent dinner, the easy laughter, the way every man seemed captivated by Hannah's allure. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. He glanced down at the rumpled black dress hugging his hips, the glittery heels strapped to his feet. As strange as it felt to admit, he liked the way he looked, the way he felt. Confident, beautiful, magnetic. Things he never felt as plain old Robert Zimmerman from Ohio. Slowly, he wiped away the smudged mascara, dampened a paper towel to dab the sweat from his brow. He finger-combed his mussed hair until it fell in soft waves once more. Uncapping a tube of ruby-red lipstick from his clutch, he carefully reapplied it, watching Hannah bloom back to life in the mirror. He could do this. He was an actor, and tonight, the starring role was the siren who had all of Broadway and Richard Macy wrapped around her manicured finger. Straightening the elegant dress, he unlocked the bathroom door and stepped back out into the smoky fray, head held high. Richard spotted him immediately, eyes lighting up as he beckoned Bob over. "There you are, beautiful. We were starting to worry you'd run off on us." "Now, why would I do that when the party's just getting started?" Bob purred in his perfected Hannah lilt. He accepted the fresh cocktail Richard pressed into his hand. "That's my girl," Richard grinned, throwing an arm around Bob's shoulders. "Come on, the night's still young and Lady Luck is on our side. Let's see if we can't take the bank, shall we?" He guided Bob back to the craps table amid the other producers' tipsy cheers. Bob allowed himself to be pulled along, taking a bracing gulp of his neon drink. The liquor burned a welcome path down his throat. He could do this. He kept repeating in his head, like a mantra. Stepping up to the table, he accepted the proffered dice once again, the cube edges digging into his palm. He caught his altered reflection in the mirrored trim around the felted surface. Blonde curls, smoky eyes, crimson smile. Hannah winked back at him. Turning to flash the crowd a dazzling grin, he blew the dice a cheeky kiss and sent them tumbling across the table with a flick of the wrist. Shouts and groans erupted as they clattered to a stop, and Bob found himself being pulled into a spinning, celebratory hug by Richard as the dealer raked a fresh mound of chips their way. "You're my lucky charm," Richard crowed, planting another sloppy kiss on Bob's cheek. "Stick with me, kid, and I'll make all your dreams come true." In that moment, champagne bubbles bursting behind his eyes, and the admiration of some of New York's most powerful men heaped upon him, Bob believed it. He, Robert Zimmerman, or Hannah Ziddell, rather, was on top of the world, untouchable, unstoppable. As the night stretched on in a whirl of clinking cocktail glasses, outrageous bets, and raucous laughter, Bob let himself get lost in it. Let himself become her, fully and completely. He flirted and preened, basking in his newfound power, giggling as the men fell over themselves to light his cigarettes and refill his drink. By the time the casino crowd had thinned and his feet were aching in their pinching stilettos, Bob realized he didn't want the fantasy to end, didn't want to go back to his shabby apartment and hand-me-down jeans. He wanted to hold on to this feeling, this glittering mirage, for as long as he could. "This has been the most marvelous night," he gushed to Richard as the older man draped a mink stole over his shoulders outside the casino door. Dawn was beginning to smudge the inky sky. "I can't thank you enough for everything." "Oh, it's just the beginning, my dear," Richard assured him with a wink. He signaled to one of the waiting town cars. "I'll be in touch very soon. We'll do lunch, discuss those great things I mentioned." "I can't wait," Bob breathed, allowing Richard to kiss him on each cheek before folding himself into the butter-soft back seat. He clutched his bursting handbag to his chest, nearly delirious with giddy exhaustion. As the car purred down rain-slick streets, he leaned his head back and closed his eyes, reliving every dazzling moment. The applause, the accolades, the open adoration. He wanted it again, needed it like oxygen. Robert Zimmerman was going to take Broadway by storm. He just had to borrow Hannah's gorgeous face to do it. And maybe, he was starting to realize with a secret thrill, her whole fascinating persona. Look out! New York! A star was about to be born, and she went by Miss Ziddell. Bob stumbled bleary-eyed into his tiny flat, just as the morning sun was gilding the grimy windows. He stopped short when he noticed Jaden perched at the rickety card table, gulping coffee and staring at him with raised brows. "Well, well, well! Look what the cat dragged in!" Jaden drawled, taking in Bob's bedraggled finery and smudged ruby lipstick. I was starting to think you'd shacked up with Richard What's-His-Name and were halfway to the Hamptons. Bob huffed out an exhaust fume laugh, kicking off his punishing heels. Please, I don't put out on the first date, no matter how many martinis they ply me with.
Uh-huh, sure. Jaden smirked. So, how was your big debut? Did Hannah knock their socks off? Gingerly lowering himself onto a wobbly kitchen chair, mindful of the dress's snug fit, Bob grinned like a satisfied cat. Oh, she slayed. Absolutely annihilated. Those stuffed shirts didn't know what hit them. Jaden leaned forward, eager for details. And, did you charm the cufflinks off the right fat cats? Get any of them to cough up their firstborns and fortunes?
All that and more, baby,
Bob preened, carefully extracting himself from the pin-pricked wig. He fluffed up his flattened hair.
Let's just say Miss Zedell is very close to getting her very own starring vehicle, if you catch my drift.
Look at you! Jaden whistled. And you were worried you couldn't pull it off. I always said you had a great pair of gams.
Oh, stop, Bob demurred, batting his smudgy fake lashes. He fished a crumpled pack of cigarettes out of his clutch and stuck one between his lips, fumbling with a studded table lighter. Exhaling a long plume of smoke, he tipped his head back and grinned at the water-stained ceiling. God, what a night. I feel buzzed, electric, like I could conquer the whole damn world in a killer pair of pumps. Jaden studied his friend's dreamy profile, something like concern pinching his brow. Yeah, I bet. Just be careful, okay? Don't lose sight of why you're doing this. It's a means to an end, not a whole new double life. Bob leveled him with a look. You worry too much. I've got a handle on it, I swear. It's not like I'm going to start mincing around in petticoats full time. He took a last long drag before stubbing out the cigarette and standing with a wince, wobbling a little. The liquor and lack of sleep hit him all at once. On that note, I'm going to shed this fabulous facade and slip into something more comfortable, like a coma. He started shuffling towards his closet-sized bedroom, unzipping the dress as he went. Hey, Jaden called after a moment. Bob turned, dress sagging off one shoulder, to find his friend giving him a sleepy, sincere smile. I'm proud of you, you know. My best buddy, the belle of the ball. You're gonna be a star, Bobby, no matter whose skin you're in. Something warm bloomed behind Bob's ribcage. Thanks, pal. For everything. We're gonna be kings of the world. Just you wait and see. Face scrubbed pink and divested of his sparkling trappings, Bob collapsed face first on his threadbare mattress in nothing but a pair of cotton briefs. As sleep pulled him under, a smile curved his lips. It was good to be Hannah Zedell. Over the next several weeks, she cropped up more and more in Bob's daily life, sometimes by contractual obligation, sometimes by sheer impulse. He attended more lavish parties as Richard's glittering arm candy, met with directors and producers who gushed over his talent, posed fetchingly for publicity photographs that ended up in Broadway gossip rags. The lines between his two personas began to blur until he found himself absent-mindedly humming torch songs in the shower, reaching for perfume before aftershave, crossing his legs at the knee like a proper lady even in dungarees. He started to look forward to the evenings he could shimmy into silk stockings and paint his face, become someone dazzling and desirable. Jaden cast him sidelong glances as he flounced around their flat in increasingly higher heels, voice pitched into a melodic alto, but held his tongue. Bob seemed happier, lighter than he had in years. If this was what it took to pep up his step, who was he to judge? And so, Hannah bloomed like a moonflower, elusive and elegant, bewitching under the stage lights and glittering chandeliers.
She entranced all who crossed her path with a sway of the hips and a husky laugh, the epitome of grace and glamour.